Okay, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. And we have Vicky doing our minute taking, and Erin, would you keep an eye on time for us in whatever way seems to make the most sense?
Do my best.
All right, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
And we will start with public comment. And it looks like Sarah is just joining us. Okay, hearing none. Our first agenda item is to approve our agenda. So may I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved, Erin.
And a second.
I'll second.
Steve.
Griffin. Oh,
I think Steve Rooney got you first. So all those in favor of approving, or is there any discussion about the agenda? Okay, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Okay, so we'll move on to our conversation tonight. And as you know, there are several action items on the agenda. And I just want to say that those are there knowing we may or may not take action tonight. Really, we want to get up to speed on all of the moving parts I think we're all aware of as the legislature tries to grapple with the kind of converging forces of Act 127 and the CLA and the Ed Fund. And so how that's impacting our budget is just a constantly moving target and has changed dramatically since when we built and then warned our budget for approval. And in addition to one of the things the legislature is considering is potentially allowing boards to withdraw their already warned budget and put forth a new one. And that has not been decided. But we wanted to make sure, because we need to warn action in advance if we were going to take it, that we had the opportunity to do so if we decided to. But that does not mean we need to. But for sure, we want to get an update on what's happening. And then for sure, I think it would be really valuable for us to spend some time talking about communicating out what we know and what we don't know to our community, and not laying all of that on the feet of the Finance Committee, which is a bit unfair considering the circumstances we find ourselves in. So thanks everyone for being here last minute, and I will turn it now over to Patrick and Floyd.
All right. It has been an interesting 2 or 3 days. We have gone in 2 or 3 days from something that felt potentially catastrophic to potentially better than what we thought when we warned the budget a couple of weeks ago. And I'll try to walk you through what has happened in those times. So let me share my screen and we'll jump right in. And I won't be able to see you when I'm sharing my screen, but feel free to stop me at any point. Just kind of chime in with a question as things come up.
Patrick, sorry to interrupt, but I will be able to see if folks raise their digital hand. So if you could just do that, I think that might be a little bit easier. Thank you. And I'll call on you.
So are you seeing the MAUSD FY25 budget presentation?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just have multiple screens. I want to make sure that's the one that you're seeing. So here we are for tonight. We're going to go way back in time to 2 days ago. Doesn't sound like a long time ago, but it's huge. So 2 days ago, we believed that the 5% cap was gone, that the yield was 91.71, and that we were not going to be eligible for the tax break, the new transition tax break that replaced the 5% cap, because we didn't believe we were disadvantaged by the changes to the weighting formula, because our calculations, when we applied the new formula to our current students, then our new formula to next year's students, we increased students. So we didn't have reason to believe that we would be considered disadvantaged. The concern 2 days ago with that understanding was with the spending that we had been talking about. So this is exactly the same information you saw at our last budget presentation. Same overall spending, same revenue, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing's changed on this. But we were talking about a capped impact versus an uncapped impact when we built this budget and you adopted it. So the concern is with that cap going away that we would be realizing the uncapped impact. And that uncapped impact produced these CLAs or these property tax rates at the end. So $2.31 down to $2.22. The concern was how that would translate was a 17-cent increase on the homestead tax rate. So that's before CLA, which was an 11.3% increase on that homestead tax rate. So those are big jumps. And what that was going to mean was per 100,000 of assessed value, we were looking at, from $410 to $465 per 100,000 in 3 of our towns, a bit less than Starksboro at 275 because they had a bigger CLA drop last year. But we were looking at some pretty significant tax increases in that uncapped scenario. That was translating into a 20 to 25% increase in the tax rates after CLA, and again a little bit less in Starksboro. And again, about a 25% increase for at least using the median for those that pay taxes based on their income. So a lot of concern, I think, in terms of what that impact for our spending plan was going to be in light of the 5% cap going away. Now we fast all the way forward to this afternoon. We got a change just this afternoon at 1 or 2 o'clock that I've updated this slideshow to represent. So as of right now, we believe the 5% cap is still gone. That messaging has remained really consistent. The yield has gone up over $600. What you'll see in a minute is that increase in the yield, which they were able to raise the yield because the financial projections got better when they took away the 5% cap. So that yield increase has an effect of reducing the homestead tax rate by about 10 cents. So you'll see that in a minute. We now believe we are eligible based on what has now been 2 iterations of this new transition tax break. The initial message we got was that we would get 5 cents off in year 1, 4 cents off in year 2, and then 3, 2, and 1 year, 1 cent off in that last year, that 5th year. The new information we got this afternoon after they recalculated is that we get 2 cents off in year 1, 2 cents off in year 2, and then 1 cent off in years 3 and 4, and 0 cents off in year 5. So still benefit from it, but it's not quite as much a benefit as it had been. We also did more homework on the CLAs and trying to get a sense of who, if anyone, is going to have a CLA updated to impact this. What we found out is that we do believe Starksboro will have their CLA updated for July 1. So we've updated the Starksboro CLA to 100%. It may not land at exactly 100%, but it should be close to 100% because it's going to be freshly done. There's a chance that New Haven will have their town assessment done, but it does not look likely. And it doesn't look like it's really at all possible for Bristol or Moncton to have a new CLA. So with this new information, the picture looks a bit different. So again, nothing's changed here. This is exactly the same slide that you saw when you adopted a budget. So we haven't changed our spending or revenue or anything here. But with those new CLAs, with the new CLA, yes, but really with the new yield and this 2 cents off, you can see here that the new projected homestead tax rate is down 10.3 cents. That's exclusively because of the change in the yield. From that, we can take off the 2 cents that we get to take off for a total reduction of 12.31 cents from what we were looking at before in terms of the homestead tax rate. So every town gets those 12 cents taken off. We then updated, you can see here that we updated the Starksboro CLA to 100%, which is almost a 25% increase. The important thing to note here is that has a positive effect on the tax rate. It absolutely lowers the tax rate, and it does so significantly. However, the values of the homes in Starksboro are going to go up, presumably somewhere around 25%. So that has to be kept in mind, right? How exactly that comes out in the wash is probably going to be a little different for each home. But from a tax rate perspective, it absolutely reduces the rate. But you can see here, so in Starksboro, clearly there's a nearly 70-cent reduction in the tax rate from what we had been projecting because of that CLA change. But even in the other towns where we didn't change the CLA from what you saw before, we're looking at a give or take 17-cent reduction in that tax rate. So that absolutely helps. So now what was a 17-cent increase is now a little bit less than a 5-cent increase on the homestead tax rate. And instead of 11.3%, it's 3.1%. What I thought would be helpful, you haven't seen this information before, but what I thought would be helpful was, what have we estimated in prior years for an increase in the homestead tax rate? And you can see for the last 5 years, we've had a reduction that we were estimating. Now, again, this is comparing estimates to estimates to try and stay as apples to apples as we can be. So in the prior 2 years, we were estimating decreases in the homestead tax rate. And then the 3 years prior to that, it was anywhere from basically 1% to 2.5% increases. So this 3.1% increase in the homestead tax rate is a little bit higher than what we have been seeing over the past 5 years. Not necessarily a whole lot higher, but it is definitely a little bit higher. So when we look at this in terms of the after CLA impact, we're currently now, if we use Bristol as the example, we're now looking at a $293 per 100,000 of assessed value increase. That was when we warned this budget, when you warned this budget, with the cap, we were expecting that would be a $333 increase. So it is about, a $40 decrease in the impact per 100,000 than the better case scenario we were projecting when this was warned. And you can see that concept holds true for all 3 towns where the CLA didn't change. And of course, with that big CLA change in Starksboro, that impact per 100,000 swings wildly the other direction. Again, a reminder that it's now based on homes that are assessed at a higher value. So just want to keep reminding folks of that caveat. So what that amounts to in terms of percent changes after CLA, instead of about a 20 to 25% in the 3 towns where the CLA didn't change, we're now looking at a 13 to 16% increase. So pretty significant change in the post-CLA impact. And then again, Starksboro with that change their CLA is showing a decrease. So how does that percentage compare to the past several years? It's higher. It is still considerably higher. Again, Starksboro being the outlier with that CLA change, but for the other 3 towns, we're still looking at 13 to 16%, where historically we've been more in the 5 to 8 range on any given year. Again, the change to the homestead tax rate was 3%. The other highest year that we would have seen in the last 5 was a 2.5% change. So most of the difference in the after CLA tax rate change is due to the CLAs being as low as they are. And then we can see here the anticipated change to the folks that pay based on income, at least using the median as a way to measure that a bit, are looking at about an 18% increase or $357. So that is, in a nutshell, the update. I can stop sharing my screen and take questions, and I can always go back into the presentation. So 2 or 3 days ago, very, very, very different story than the one I was able to just share with you. We're actually looking in better shape now than when this budget was adopted by you and Warren.
Brad,
I'm trying to, okay, can you hear me? There you go. Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is, I mean, obviously the last couple of days have been, it's a step in the right direction. I guess the question that I would have is, okay, if it changed so drastically in the last 2 days, what's going to happen in the next 2 days? So I think that the issue, as I see it, and the issue that is presented to the board is, what's the best strategy to pursue? Because do we want to you sort of redo the budget, warn a new budget, and then have the the rug pulled out from under us, once again when the winds shift in Montpelier. So, and I'm not sure I know the answer to that, and what the implications might be in Montpelier if all of the districts around the state say, we're just going to punt the budget discussion down the road until June or July or something, until the state figures out, gets their act together. I don't know how that would be received in Montpelier, and I think that's would be an important sort of consideration on our part.
And just for context, this isn't any different budget than what's already been adopted and warned. So the only way you'd have to warn a new budget is if you change the expenditures, and nothing you've seen here shows any change. So as it stands now, which again, as Brad said, it's not currently law, until it's set in stone, it's, up for being changed. But as it stands now, the budget that's warned could continue on and be voted on town meeting day, and everything can continue as planned. It's just our messaging to the community about what we anticipate the impact of that budget being is different than what we would have been saying a couple of weeks ago or a couple of days ago. And that's the hard part, right? Part of that strategizing is, how long do we wait before we start sharing information with the community about what the anticipated impact will be? It'd be nice to wait until it's written into law and we have something we can bank on. And that's going to be probably the better part of another week before that's done, I would guess.
Mike.
Thanks, Patrick, for the update. Given how sensitive the budget is, or at least the tax rates are, to the change in the yield, I was wondering how confident we were with the new projection of the yield. Right, see, that seemed to have pushed us from really catastrophically high budgets to maybe more manageable tax increases. But I imagine there's a lot of assumptions baked into this new prediction for the yield that may or may not come to fruition, given how up in the air everybody's budgets are. So can you comment a little bit about our confidence in that yield estimate?
I can a little bit, and I can certainly give Floyd a chance to chime in too. So as a result of the 5% cap going away and the calculation of what the impact would be with this replacement transition tax break, that's what gave them information to update the yield and then share that updated yield with us, which is what you saw. We just this afternoon got this revised tax break. So they've done some recalculating. I don't know what impact that might have on the yield. So I don't think it will necessarily drive it another $600 one way or the other, like we saw this last round. But unless Floyd's seen something more recently, I think we can expect some change to that yield, but I don't think anything in terms of the scale of what we just saw. Floyd, I don't know if you want to chime in on that.
We did reach out to the AOE specific to the yield and have not heard back on whether or not there is an impacted change based on this new information. So What we're using is the most recent number that the AOE has given us, and I would say confidence is at about 100% that that will not be the yield in May. But how much it moves and in what direction, we'll see.
And I know just in the update we got today, like our tax break decreased, but we know that some other districts had an increase in their tax break. So exactly how that comes out in the wash, we wouldn't really have any idea right now, but I'm sure they're working to calculate that and update us.
Steve, go ahead.
I think Kristen had her hand up first.
Okay, Kristen, then Steve.
So just a hypothetical, if we needed to change what we've presented and warned, but we want to wait, can we wait a week to decide? Like, just what would that look like? Just because, timing is obviously of the essence with all of this. And, it's just sort of like a hurry up and wait game that we're kind of in.
Part of the anticipated language on the new legislation they're writing is going to speak to what latitude districts boards have to sort of recall a warning or rewarn a new budget. I haven't seen any draft of that language yet. I was expecting to see it today, but I haven't. So I know that's part of the discussion and it will be part of the legislation. Exactly what it says is a little unclear, but I think they recognize that effectively by now, almost all the districts in the state have warned a budget. So as they're kind of changing the game a little bit, they recognize that that will prompt some districts to likely want to pull their budget back and make some changes and rewarn it. So they're gonna spell out how that can happen in the legislation. I just haven't seen it yet.
So Kristen asked my question. The other thought I was thinking about was in terms of what we warned. We weren't using the old language where we had to give the percentage change per equalized student or something, so we don't have to worry about that shifting for ballot language. It's simply a budget number at this point. But what might change is if were we about to send out flyers that did tax information, but we haven't sent those out?
Flyers and the annual report are the two things that would sort of articulate the impact, and that's where we're a little gun shy right now. We're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place because we can't really wait a whole lot longer to get those things out to the printer and move that forward. And yet, if we sent it out right now, we'd be really hesitant to send it out based on anything but what is currently in law, which talks about the 5% cap and everything else, which we know isn't going to be true. So that from a timing perspective, that's the trickiest thing, is how long can we wait to send this information out? And I think we'd rather, I mean, it's a few $1,000s, maybe $5,000 or $6,000 to send that stuff to the printer and have it mailed to homes and do all those things. So to do all of that, go through that work, spend that money, misinform people, call it back and do it again with new information, I don't think is a good approach. And people are going to get kind of anxious over the next week when we haven't sent something out.
I'd like us to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the communications plan, but just like a seed planting on that is that there may be like a step in between, which is to try to reach folks with kind of what we know right now in ways other than print, which is we have other ways to communicate with folks while we're reading on the printed materials. And I think we should. Heather? I guess right now we're in the item of, I don't have my agenda in front of me.
Well, and I think we were a little bit, when we built the agenda several days ago, we had no idea what was coming in terms of this presentation. So
Right.
like we didn't have anything moved or anything like that, but I did think it was important to start with a presentation to set the context for whatever we want to do with those action items, as opposed to making some sort of action or motion around any of them yet.
Yeah. I had a question about, I mean, I guess wondering how many other districts you think are likely to pull their budgets. I mean, of course, we really don't know, but just if we had to project who's still significantly impacted and might need to do that, and then does that then also impact the yield? I mean, I don't know how those two things work, but I know that we always have, we're always in the dark to some degree on how much the yield is going to change by the time May comes around when we warn our budget. So that's not a new thing, but I'm wondering what are the most dramatic things that could happen now, and is that one of them? And how likely is it that a lot of folks, now that they've released this potential tax break scenario, which for us softens the blow considerably, are people still going to be scrambling to redo their budgets?
I have a little bit of information on that, just sort of anecdotally, as folks have been talking up and down the Champlain Valley. Looks like more districts than not aren't planning right now to pull their budget and rewarn something different, but there are definitely some. And I think in terms of your question, I don't know, as I said, I don't know what the impact will be of this recalculation of this tax break. Outside of that, I think the only other actions going forward would likely improve the yield, because I don't see somebody pulling a budget to add money to it to rewarn. The only thing I can see going forward is either budgets fail on town meeting day or districts pull budgets back to take money out and rewarn. So all those potential decreases in budgets will have a positive effect on the yield.
Okay. Before we get into the making that motion about whether we're going to recall or not and getting folks' temperature on that action that we have on our agenda, just want to make sure that not everybody has asked a question. I just want to make sure nobody has any other questions at this moment for Patrick or Floyd about the presentation.
I think I see Kristen's hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kristen. Yeah, you are not on my radar, friend. I'm sorry.
I mean, I don't know what I did, but so, is there a downside to waiting a week to see what happens if there's any changes? Just kind of throwing it out there. If, I know that there's the time crunch of getting everything to the printers and the communication, to everybody out there, but what would that look like? Just because, just based on, and this is just my personal interpretation, everything just, given the situation in Montpelier, just everything just seems so wishy-washy, where, there could certainly be changes. I mean, I don't know. Is there a drawback to that? Just kind of tossing it out there.
No, I mean, I think that's the wise thing to do. Again, when we talked about this budget or this agenda for tonight, there was a chance that there would even be some legislation for us to act on. And we thought at the very least, as that became clear that we wouldn't have the legislation, having the opportunity to discuss what's changed and sort of get an update felt like it was still valuable for tonight. Personally, I don't think there's a problem in waiting. I think it's actually the right thing to do because it's not law yet. And we want to make sure that we have more confidence before we take any significant action. And I guess the only downside is like the waiting and wondering and the challenges that come with not knowing is the only downside, but there's nothing we can really change about that.
Sarah?
Sorry, I'm not a basketball game. This feels like when everything happened in COVID and everything happened really fast and you made really bad decisions that you didn't realize you were making till like a day later, etc. So I would prefer that we paused and didn't like make a reset tonight.
Okay, it sounds like we're shifting toward our action item. So let's just get a motion so we can discuss that and decide if we're what we're going to do. So the action on the table, sorry, I keep moving my agenda, is to recall the warning and ballot.
Kristen, can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
Yeah, Patrick, going to, Kristen's point, what's the actual, drop dead date for us? I mean, Kristen threw out a week, but what is the actual date that, by which we would have to, make a final decision on this?
I'd have to check. So I'd have to see, it's really only around the annual report. That's the only thing that may be tied to a timeline that is legislated. There's nothing that says we have to send a budget flyer at all. So we have some wiggle room there, but we do include a lot of that same information in the annual report. So I'd have to check and see what that actual drop dead date is. It's really it's early part of next week, I think, is typically what we would say is the drop dead date to get it out to printers and back and distributed in time for the our annual meeting. So that's the crunch that we're feeling. And maybe we'll have some legislation early next week, but probably not by Tuesday.
Yeah, it seemed like, sorry, it seemed like from listening to the hearings that actual confirmed legislation was several weeks out for them to actually put something into law. There might be something drafted that everybody thinks is going to be, moved forward, but something stapled in place looked like it was quite a ways out, which is why I think they were contemplating giving people leeway on the warning date.
They've certainly talked about giving some room on the warning and being able to schedule another vote, but haven't given any clear direction around what that might look like at this point.
Folks, I see a member of the public has her hand up, and if it is for a piece of information and not a public comment, does the board give permission to recognize her? Okay, Nancy, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering about there's nothing said in we're all used to voting on our school budget on town meeting day, but that's not set in stone. And I'm just wondering if there are whether you stick with the budget you've got or you get more information and decide you need to change it. What do you see, Patrick and Floyd, as the downsides of pushing the vote on the budget out a bit so that you have time to get more solid information from Montpelier?
The real downsides that I see are, and they're not insurmountable, but it's sort of the reality. I think we would have less turnout at a vote off of town meeting day, and B, it's the efforts that it takes, in particular on town clerks, to hold a special election outside of town meeting day. Those are really the bigger downfalls.
Okay, so I think if I have my Robert's rules procedures correct, we need to move the action item and then we can discuss further and then take a vote because it is on the agenda. So does someone want to make a motion to recall the warning?
I make a motion that we table the recall.
So do we need to do something with that first action item, or can we, I guess this is what I'm not sure about. Can you leave that? Can we just move right to tabling it, or?
Well, that's the motion.
That's a new motion. Okay. All right. So Steve Rooney's making a motion to table the action item. And is there a second?
Second.
Brad seconds. Okay, so the motion on the floor right now is to table the action item to recall the warning. Is there any discussion? Any additional discussion?
Just so you know, if you say yes, that's going to table the next item effectively.
Okay, so it seems like there's no other discussion. So all those in favor of tabling the action to recall the warning and the ballot, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so the motion carries. So sorry, Steve, are you saying we need to then, we still need to do the same for the next motion? Or the next action item?
Yeah, logically, the next item
Would you like
can't
to
be
make
done.
that motion? Do we need to
So
still
I'll make
formally
a
remove it?
motion. I mean, I guess I could have made a motion to do both of them at the same time, but
Yeah.
I make a motion to table setting a new budget target.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Is that Kristen?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, all those, any discussion? All right, all those in favor of tabling the action to set a new budget target, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. And our next action item is to develop a communications plan. Can I have a motion? So we can discuss it.
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, Barb, you got this one as the motion maker, and Kristen, are you okay to second that? Great.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's discuss. So it sounds like we have to get some things to the printer. Patrick, you said middle or end of next week. You're muted.
Normally we probably would have sent them already, but normally our drop dead would have been early part of next week.
Okay. So I guess the one question is, what, if anything, do we communicate out in advance of that publication? And then the next question is, do we change what that flyer says? And I don't think we have the flyer, though. We don't know exactly what that looks like to be able to offer feedback. But to the first point, what do folks think about how best, what our options are for kind of keeping people informed and sharing what we know at this point? Steve.
So, Patrick, do we have any way of doing something out of the ordinary, which would be to put the annual report together with everything except for the unknowns and sending out like an addendum, a week or two later in some separate mailing that might be just a couple of pages rather than the whole book?
Yes,
Plus, the other question is, on top of that is, are we mailing out annual reports to every single household these days, or is it simply upon request?
we typically mail the report card. We make the electronic version of the annual report available to anyone, and we put it out in different places. And we print, some number of hard copies so that town offices have some hard copies. So we have a handful of hard copies available at several different locations. So we could absolutely, it would be more than a couple of pages if we take anything that is related to the finances out. But we could do sort of an annual report that's everything but the financials, and then a follow-up that is exclusively financials as a sort of supplementary document.
But
It's a pain in the neck, but it's doable.
yeah, if we let's just throw a scenario out there. If we did not change our budget, the things that would change in the financials would be the end tax impacts, right? Now, that part of it, I can't imagine is a whole lot of pages. The financials you're talking about are like everything that gets you up to that point, right?
Yeah, they're happen to have a copy of the annual report here. So
I'm just
like
thinking.
the
I'm just thinking if in the scenario that we didn't change anything in terms of what we were reporting, just just sending out an addendum on the impacts of that, which would simply be changed by whatever came out of Montpelier, then it might
Yep.
only be a couple of pages. And we could
Yeah, so I'm
include all
looking at
we can include everything that led up to that in the annual report.
yep. No,
And
that's actually a good
that's
point.
only in the scenario that we don't end up somehow discovering we need to do a new budget.
Right. It actually, so just kind of quickly skimming through the copy of the annual report that I have in front of me, it might actually only be 2 pages because everything else is the budget detail, which if we're not changing the budget, as you said, that's all would remain true. So there's the understanding the property tax page where we use the figures and kind of walk people through how it's calculated. And then there's the three prior year comparisons that would be different. So
Yeah.
those might be the only 2 pages that we would need to supplement.
I think the page in between, which has some projected change in ed tax rates, would be impacted as well.
Yeah. So if it was, up to like 5 pages or so, it might be something that we could more flexibly deal with and not hold up the printing presses.
Yep.
Is there
then-
anything in the letter from the
sorry.
board chair about it? That talks about changing in
Yep.
budget numbers, but not, there's no conversation in there about tax impact. I don't believe.
Well, is that already written?
Yep.
Yeah, you might have to put out a new letter that talks about the ambiguity, and that it might even say there's going to be, a forthcoming addendum based upon the realities of Montpelier.
Kevin, go ahead.
So I'm thinking our annual meeting's in 19 days. And if we punt until next Tuesday, that's 14 days. Sounds like we're trying to pack a lot in there with a 2-step annual report. I think we just need to do the best we can after Tuesday, if that's what we're kind of walking down a path for, and just do it.
It could be that the addendum is only if we get new information. Maybe we just put it all out the way it is now, and then the addendum is an addendum. It's going to change what's in the report.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If we did that, we would just have to decide, are we sharing the impact we think it will be based on the discussions that have been had about what might be future legislation? Or are we saying what the impact is under the current law, which we know won't stay as is?
Mike.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and maybe I'll just extend it, maybe showing some of my ignorance of this process, but are we confident that whatever the new change might be will be in place before people are asked to vote? Because it seems to me like this conversation about communication is all about preparing the electorate to be able to make an informed decision on the budget that we put forth. And so if we don't even think that's going to be in place by the time we ask them to vote, it seems like we either have to not ask them to vote, or we have to ask them to vote with our best understanding, right? And we have to prepare the information as this is as best we know at this point in time, given all the factors. And if it's the latter, then Patrick, to your question, I think we absolutely have to not present how the law is right now, but what we think in all earnestness, right, what the impact of this will be. And so the kind of projections that you presented today to me seem to be what would be core for sending out as part of a mailer or setting out in terms of in preparation of the annual meeting.
I appreciate your use of the term confidence, and it's almost a non-starter when when you bring that up, because it's so hard to have much confidence these days in terms of the the shifting sands. It's I think rather than using the term confidence, I think what we presented tonight is it's the best information we have right this minute. And the minutes that come tomorrow may change that. But at some point in time, and the reality is that has always been true to an extent. Even when there isn't sort of the shifting sands that we have this year, when we're projecting tax impacts, they are just that. They are projections. I don't think we've ever been exactly right to the penny, because things always change after the fact. We just have a lot more sort of variables this year than even in a normal year.
But I think if we can push to our drop dead deadline of, like say next Tuesday, just to see, what else might settle after this reconfiguration. And then, like, to your point, we put out what is our best information, and then we consider whether we need to do some other communication blasts if and when things change in other ways, to say, hey, these are the updates, and to really think about how best to get that information out. I do think the print materials are of value to some members of our community, and there may be ways to reach them in addition to the social media and front porch forum, if information changes so much that it really changes the picture of what folks are going to be voting on.
I do think we may have some information, at least some messaging about what the language around changing the date of the vote and the subsequent impact on the annual meeting and all those things. We may have some information on what that could look like by middle of next week. So that may be important information as well.
Kevin and then Steve.
I would just caution, whatever we say, even if it's our best information at the time, if it turns out wrong, it will be carved in stone by the time it becomes wrong. So the nuance of trying to say here's the best of what we know is something, I guess we go through that exercise, but we need to also pretty much understand that if it doesn't, and it likely won't come out that way, that it's nobody's going to remember that this is the point that we were at, type thing. So
The only thing I think might help us a little is that it's all over the news that this is a chaotic situation, and we have our AD&D reporter here too. So hopefully folks are seeing that the gray factor that's like we're all dealing with is a little more significant this round. But Steve, what's that?
If it comes out negatively, they will forget all that. And you'll hear the word trust about 100 times.
Go ahead, Steve.
So just talking about logistics for a moment, if we're going to wait till, say, the middle of next week to put out the annual report, on the chance that something might change, the board's not going to have time to react to that and approve something different to go in the report. I think if we're going to decide to put the report out as is under the current, as we know, standpoint, it's going to be from tonight's meeting. I don't think it's going to be new information on Tuesday, say, that we're somehow going to be able to get everybody all back on the same page to put out something new that we knew from what we've heard tonight. And chances are, if it is new, it's probably some, you know, it's again, it's similar to the fact that the yield doesn't get finalized till June, and we'll just look like we didn't know what we were talking about, like we do every year, because the state finally comes up with the final yield after we've already voted. So my sense is we put the thing out as it stands right now, unless Krista, you want to add some new language to your cover letter, which I think you could do before Tuesday, just to kind of make people aware of the current, you know, shifting sands. But other than that, I don't think the board can actually authorize to put out a difference in the report that we haven't had a chance to sit down and do this same meeting for in the middle of next week.
Steve, when
So-
you say to put it out as it stands now, do you mean as I presented it tonight or as it stood
Yeah.
before? Okay.
Yes, yeah, as it's per what Mike was saying, which I agree with. Our best knowledge as of today, put it out in that fashion. If the thing changes on Tuesday, it's too late for us to change that as a board. I mean, if it was just you, Patrick, putting it out based on whatever you happen to hear that afternoon in the email stream, then that'd be one thing. But theoretically, we can't really put out a report we haven't all had a chance to sit down and talk about.
And I guess the what I would like is the sort of blessing from the board that if we do hear on Tuesday that the 2-cent reduction became a 3-cent reduction, I could include that update and the updated impact of that change and send it out. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think we might expect over the next few days, is some incremental little something here and there.
Hang on, Steve, I want to let Aaron interject. Thanks. Go ahead, Aaron.
I'm actually Kristen's hand is like, it's really blonde up in the top corner, so it's hard to see, but Kristen did have her hand up.
That's why I can't see.
Yeah.
It's blurring in your background. Okay, Kristen and then Aaron.
So I just thank you, Aaron. I just wanted to echo what Kevin was saying in that and this was something that was actually pointed out and was made very evident in the hearing today that House Ways and Means Committee had, in that it's the confidence that the community has in all of us as board members, and I think that we all need to keep that in mind before we put something out there, because we've been in precarious positions before, and I think we should definitely keep that in the back of our heads.
Yeah, my comment is on a similar vein, speaking to the ever growing or ever changing relationship we have with the community and how we're looking at trying to build that. So I know that we had talked about Steve's initial idea of, taking out what we don't know and that kind of thing. But I'm wondering, is there a way to sort of condense what we don't know into a series of bullet points or something, and asterisk that somewhere into the report that says, here are things that might change. And in that way, we're informing the public of things that we might not have all of those unknowns marked, but at least in some way we could say, if the final number or if the tax rate or if the yield changes, here's what might have led to that. I'd rather arm them with things we don't even know so that they have a sense of what we're still grappling with and why things might change on the fly or pretty quickly, or why we might send out a secondary note, than not have that included and then have people grappling with sort of the whiplash effect of changes.
Brad.
Yeah, I think if there are, as Patrick said, if there are incremental or relatively de minimis changes between now and next week, I'm pretty comfortable as a board member to let Patrick and Floyd, run with that. If there are drastic changes, I think that, Steve's comments regarding logistics notwithstanding, I think it would be incumbent upon us as a board to reconvene.
We do have committee meetings scheduled for next Tuesday, and so that's convenient in that if we did need to get together again, we could use some of that time. It's also an opportunity for that committee to, see what the latest look is of the report, if there are small changes. If we want to wait until then to finalize the report. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so I think you had mentioned that potentially we might do a full board meeting start to that committee session. Potentially.
We did not.
Oh.
We didn't decide that.
No, I'm not that we decided it, but there was that was an option.
Oh, maybe.
I think that might have been a backup plan if we couldn't meet tonight.
Okay.
Oh yeah, okay. Well,
Yeah.
maybe we want to make that maybe more formal. Maybe we just want to touch base before, for 15, 20 minutes before we start. Maybe there's nothing to report, and that's fine. We move on. But if there's something substantial to report, then that would give Patrick an opportunity to go through it.
It sounds pretty dreamy to not have something to report on Tuesday.
I only want to meet if we can see the DeLorean slide again. That was fun. And I like change directions. Very clever.
Thank you for noticing that. I really had to think about that. That was good.
I did notice. Yeah. I love how well, I don't want to project, but I can appreciate how one might distract themselves from the actual material with finding fun images to put on the slide deck. So what do people think about that idea of what our committees all meeting room? Oh, I know that I'm going to be in person with community engagement. Some of our folks do join remotely, but what about the other community?
I can be there with you in person.
Thank you, friend. Are the other committees meeting in person or remotely? Or I guess it doesn't matter. We could just use the OWL to.
Well, they're currently warned as in person. At least ours is, right?
So we could warn a full board meeting from 6 to 6:30 and then peel off and do our committees. Is that something folks think we should do?
The only conflict there is I think the other meetings are also warned to start at 6. So I don't know if it's possible for people to start at 5:30 or 5:45.
Oh, right.
To avoid having to change the other meetings that are already warned.
I personally don't have a problem with that, but that's not everybody.
Show of hands if that works for folks to start at 5:30. Okay, I'm going to say 5:30 because I think 15 minutes together is an ambitiously short amount of time. But who knows? We could be done and have a quick snack break before committee meetings. Okay, so we do have a motion on the table to develop a communications plan, although so I think does someone want to recap for me what we've decided? And then we can vote on that motion.
I think it's going to be predicated on what we hear on Tuesday.
Okay, so for right now, we're holding.
I can share what my takeaway was, if that's helpful.
Please, thank you.
I think my marching orders are prepare the budget flyer and the annual report based on what we know right now, with the potential to update that with incremental changes between now and Tuesday. And if there's something really substantive between now and Tuesday, we have an opportunity where we can discuss those and then have hopefully a really quick turnaround to get it out the next day on Wednesday.
That's square with folks.
Can I just clarify what we know today does that mean info that we've received that the state is percolating on? Or does it mean law?
I should say no is a strong word. What we believe is true as of today. And
I
that
agree with
includes
that.
the updated info.
Thank you.
Liz,
I think what the information you got today, because they felt very strongly about not going back to the cap. And even though it sounded like they were fine with, they were definitely looking forward to going forward on changes. They're not going to go back to where they were, right? And they're not going to do nothing. So I think the safest bet is what they talked about today, right? Thank you so much for your work on all of it.
I also think it's important to highlight what might change. If we're going to put together something that I think it's really important that people know that this is all fluid, there's nothing solid. And if you're going to put a report out, even if it's a temporary thing, I think people should know that there are what things are in the washing machine still.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with that, and you know that there's potential for other changes. It's just a very fluid conversation, and we don't know. We know as much as we know, as of right now, and that's all we can say, and that it's certainly subject to change, and it's out of our hands. It's all in Montpelier.
go ahead, Steve.
so what Aaron's talking about, I think it might be spread over a couple of locations. One, there might be some mention of that in the cover letter. But if it's more helpful for people to know kind of exactly where those ambiguities lie, then likely asterisks or footnotes might be needed in the financials.
Yeah, I agree.
Would you want a mention of, so it's clear to me, like talking about what could change in terms of the way this budget would impact taxes. I'm not sure I'm hearing that I would want to mention that something that could change is the budget, which then changes everything. That takes it to a whole different place. I think what I'm hearing you say is assume the budget is the budget, and what we're talking about are what could change to the impact.
Yeah.
Even though we know there's a chance that maybe the budget changes depending on where this goes, that's not necessarily the direction we're going just yet.
Yeah, if the first decision we made was that we're holding the budget, we're not looking at recalling that, then I think, yes, the first thing you said is true. We're just looking at what the impacts are right now. And if we have to go down the route of recalling the budget later, well, that's where we are then. But
Steve,
Yeah, like if on Tuesday something crazy comes out of Montpelier, hopefully at that point they've also given us some leeway on when we have to warn again. And at that point, maybe we're bringing those tabled items back to the front. Who knows?
so I think what we could add to this plan is that we will make some of those changes, and then we can share that. In addition to any updates that we might have, we can share that when we meet at 5:30 on the 13th. Okay.
Is there a concise motion that wraps that all up?
I mean, who was the person that made the motion to begin with? I mean, I would suggest we could just say I'm not going to make a suggestion, actually.
well, the motion was to develop a communications plan, right?
Yes.
We just did that. Why do we have to change the motion?
Well, because we should record exactly what we told Patrick we wanted him to do.
And those should be reflected in the minutes.
I wonder if it's as simple as something to the effect of moving that we update the budget flyer and the annual report in light of the information Patrick presented tonight. noting areas that might change going forward.
I make a
Okay.
motion to amend. I make a motion to amend the original motion as Patrick just described.
Vicky, did you get that language?
I did not. So
Okay.
I was waiting for, okay, so motion to amend the original. Well, are you going to vote on the other one? Motion to develop.
We have to motion the amendment first.
Okay, so motion to run the original motion as Patrick described, but I need that clarified, please.
Which was to update the annual report and budget flyer in light of the information shared tonight with the most up-to-date information regarding the tax impact. Noting,
Wait, hang on.
sorry,
I have motion to amend the original motion to update the original report and budget flyer with the information shared tonight.
just the annual report and
Oh,
budget flyer.
I'm sorry, update the annual report, sorry.
With the
Annual
information
report.
presented tonight,
Uh-huh.
noting or highlighting the potential changes.
Amend the
Noting-
original motion to update the annual report and budget flyer with the information shared tonight, highlighting the potential changes.
Hiding the potential items that may change.
So motion to amend the original motion to update the annual report and budget flyer with the information shared tonight, highlighting the potential items that may change.
Yes. And we need a second.
I'm
That was
sorry,
Steve.
Steve was the primary,
Yep,
was the first.
Steve
Okay.
made the amendment, and do we have a second?
I'll second.
Kristen. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, the amendment to the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so that motion carries. And now we need to vote on the, I'm sorry. I'm
Yep,
just
so-
not fluid
yep.
with Robert's rules.
Yeah, we
Good
just
thing I-
need to vote on the
my
original.
tenure almost done.
You got it.
We just need to vote on the original motion as amended.
Okay, so all those in favor of the original motion as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That may be the most difficult thing we've done all evening. Okay, I just also want to say thanks everyone for meeting last minute, and also to the folks that were able to tune in for the session. I think it's great when folks have the capacity to do that and really hear how things are emerging in the moment. And so we will plan to meet again on Tuesday, the 13th. And before we adjourn, do we have any public comment? Okay. Hearing none, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Aaron.
And a second.
I'll second.
Okay, all those, and that was Kristen, Vicky.
Thank you.
All those in favor of adjourning at 7:11, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. See
Bye,
you soon.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good
Aye.
night.
Good night.